Well, we are officially on the edge of the start of the 2026 season. Of course, we've got got a little while until the first race of the season in Australia, but we're now just a couple of days away from livery reveals. We're seeing, and hearing about shakedowns that are happening within teams where they're testing cars. Before the actual test that happens in Bahrain, which is happening next month. I think there's even potentially some testing going on earlier than that, but we're really in the realms of getting close to it. This, for an F1 fan, is very much like Christmas, in that when everything you ask for you don't really get. It looks a little bit weird. You don't like what you look at, and you get excited for the first few days, and then only a few of us stick around until the end. I don't know. It's just how it is, and very much like any family debate during Christmas, things seem to get heated in social media. I have no idea why. But we are on the precipice of some big changes to rules for the 2026 season. This is a big car change, big culture change, and you might have been watching Formula One and going, thinking one or two things. If you're someone that's fairly new to the sport, of going, it looks the same. I don't know, F1 cars always look the same. Like, what's so different about them? Nothing really special, nothing really new about them or anything like that. And if you're a nerd like me, you probably have the perspective of, what do you mean big changes? Stuff's changing every year. What are you talking about? And do you know what's weird? I agree with both sets of fans. Let's start off by really going into it and really jumping into the situation with the F1 regulation changes. And I wanted to start off with the image that F1 provided of these regulation changes. And I mean, to the untrained eye, it looks exactly the same as it has done for the past 30, 40 years. A ridiculous spaceship that you would never imagine on the roads, and, unusual front wing, unusual rear wing, and the driver sits in the middle. What's so different about it all? And I sort of agree with you. To the untrained eye, nothing looks different. What about the nerd thing about everything changes? Well, again, you're right. Now, if you were to look into where rules have changed, this is what you get. And as you can see, there are changes for every single year. And it has changed every year. And actually, if you were to look further back, it would make sense, because actually, if you start scrolling up right to the top, you can see the cars look dramatically different in the past to what they do now. And that is the way in which it goes. And you can see by looking at the years, we've got rule change in 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. Literally every single year, there are changes. But without looking into too much of this, the text and the data, because I had a little bit of a review myself, is that a lot of these are literally just little rule changes. Right? For example, the 2025 situation, it just says teams now allowed to develop 2026 cars. By the way, that's a really good indication that there could be something different. When there is a rule saying now you can start developing next year's car, or for a certain year, it's big, right? And then other rule changes you see, fastest lap point to polish. That's not really that big of a deal. Minimum driver weight allowance. That's got nothing to do with cars. A lot of these things don't have anything to do with the car at all. In fact, there's even bits about the profanity situation, which you know my thoughts on that. So, a lot of these are just little things, or they don't affect the cars themselves. But sometimes we will get what's known as a technical. I've just forgotten the name. It's not technical infringement. Um, Basically, like one tiny little rule change that happens halfway, a little bit through the season. That's where you do get rule changes halfway through, and those, in reality, they're not necessarily rule changes for everybody, but it's almost like we're now going to make X illegal in F1. Let me give you an example, a couple of examples that I mean. I'll start off with a recent example, which is DAS. Now, in 2021, DAS was brought in place by Mercedes, a really interesting system. We don't know really if it fully worked, that basically allowed the driver to adjust the angle in which the tyres went so as to better improve tyre warm ups, grip situations, different things like that. And a regulation was adjusted to outlaw that at the end of the season. And a more famous example is in the 1970s when this car was introduced, the Brabham Fan Car. 1978 this was. And this car raced in one race, won that race, and then the car was deemed illegal. Now, when this sort of thing happens, it's got nothing to do with actually the FIA or F1 going, right, these are going to be the future rules for everybody. It's more of a case of teams moaning that their opponent has come up with a solution that is so much better than theirs, and it will make the sport uncompetitive, and the FIA responding. Happens all the time. Happened to Mercedes, happened to Brabham, happened to Williams in the 90s. It happened to Red Bull quite recently as well, where regulation changes will change one very, very specific rule to just outlaw a team's design. It kind of goes against it's one of those, it goes against the rules of innovation, because you want engineers to innovate, but it goes for the rules of competitiveness. You don't want to be in a situation where, no one can compete, basically. And here's the thing. When we talk about the sweeping rule changes, the big time rule changes, this is where you do get what's known as eras. You get eras and mini eras. Let me give you an example of a mini era. So, for example, 2023, where they adjusted the aerodynamics further to improve the cars when it came to bouncing on the ground, what's known as porpoising. So it's like a mini era within an era, right? And we talk about since 2022. I was about to say 2021, but 2022 as an era, because this was when ground effect was introduced, redesigning the bottom of cars, looking to change the way in which the cars interacted with the ground. Another example of an era is back in 2016, I believe. No, 2014, right? Where, again, big change that happened where they brought in a new engine, a new way that the engine was going to be designed. So they changed the power unit, which changed the way that the cars would have to react to the power unit. So you're starting to see a little bit of changes here on that. 2013, we had a bit of an era that happened where DRS was introduced, a new way that things were going to be raced. So these regulation big era changes are normally in terms of the way that the car acts in the air, the way that the car drives with the engine, and with basically the style in which the car is going to be driven around. For example, the DRS changed the way in which drivers drove the car, because it was more about being within 1 second of the driver to get that DRS in the DRS zone. That's eras. I think it's fair to say 2026 is a super era, because it's not doing one of those things. It's doing all three. And let's do a deep dive into it and really get to grips with what is going on for F1 for this year, why it's such a big deal, why everyone's talking about it, and why it's so clever. And I want to start off with the picture because, yes, you're right, it's the untrained eye. This doesn't look very different at all. But to the trained eye, there's a couple of interesting things here. For example, what's going on here? In this area, that would normally be fully curved round. Why is there a little bit of a cut-off area? The rear wing and the front wing also look a lot simpler than what we would expect. And I don't know about you, but just looking at the car, it's one of those where you see yourself after a big diet, where you're looking at it and going, I mean, it's an F1 car, but I don't know, something looks different about it. So let's go into that detail and basically see what is different about it. Now, the way I've got it from F1's actual website. Whether they allow it to do this, I don't know. And so you've got to admit that when it's coming from F1 themselves, they're going to dress it up and make it sound like the most exciting thing in the world. We're just going to drill down into the facts and talk about it because it's going to be very fascinating. So, let's start off with the aerodynamics. The thing that was like the DRS, the ground effect, all that sort of thing, the aerodynamics of the car. So, what's different? Well, the car's size will be different. They're going to be narrower, they're going to be smaller, they're going to be lighter, they're going to have smaller tyres. It's going to be, the cars are going to be more nippy, they're going to be more about the corners than they were in the previous era. Not necessarily when they've been before, because they were very nippy during the 90s, probably dangerously so, but that's going to improve things. And weight is going to be taken off, drag's going to be taken off in the ideal world. We'll talk about the thing about the ideal world a little bit later on, right? But yeah, it's apparently going to be all about cleaner lines. So aerodynamics is changing on that basis. Now, in terms of this, let's now go into it a bit further. Ground effects, that ground effects era is gone. Flatter floors, right? We're back to flatter floors, which I think is a good thing. It's a very messy situation when it comes to the ground effect. And I think the one thing that's I think was the big perspective was that damaged cars got affected a lot more. And you could see, there'd be like a car driving along slower than normal, and it looks fine, but there's something just catching on the ground effect and affecting the aerodynamics. So I'm glad that that's actually gone. I like the science behind the ground effect. I don't like when things don't go right, if that makes sense. So ground effect is gone. Now, this is the interesting thing, and this is where we start getting the question marks, because it does mention this will mean less downforce and a higher ride height requirement that should lead to a greater variety of setups that suit a greater range of driving styles, thus levelling the playing field. How does that work? How does that work? This higher ride requirements, so they're going to be higher off the ground, that should lead to a greater variety of setups that suit a greater range of driving styles. The only thing I can think of is something that we had back in 2020, I believe it was, might have been 2021, where we had what's known as high rake and low rake. Ultimately, there were cars that were a bit more level with the ground, that were all about the top speed, the high speed straights. It was all about getting the most out of it. At the end of the day, when it's on like a sort of straight line, it's nicer in those straight in the straight lines, so it makes it faster and better in the air. And then you'd have what's known as high rake. High rake was basically when the cars were actually angled forwards in such a way that it allowed it to dive more into corners and corner better. Red Bull and Mercedes had that situation where Red Bull had a high rake car, might have been low rake, but high rake, a car that was all about the corners, Mercedes had a car that was all about the straights. Now, could we be seeing more elements of that and a fascinating way in which that gets adjusted? Maybe that's got something to do with what the higher ride height means. I don't know. There could be some intricate things that even I am not considering as part of that. Now, the rear wings, the front and rear wings, does say it will be simpler. There must be some rules about the simplicity of that. Rear beam wings will be no more, while at the other end of the car, the front wing will feature narrow elements. So, front wing is narrower, rear wing is less complex as well. Now, it's interesting, the outer section of the front wing will also offer potential new areas of development. So, will it be the edges of the wing that will get all the design this time? Could be really fascinating on that, and be interesting to start seeing the cars, especially in the open testing in Bahrain, but also in the first Grand Prix in Australia, to actually see how these cars look. We're probably not going to get it when it comes to the livery reveals. They'll probably just do like a showcase car, almost like wrap the 2026 car in their livery, but that could be something to keep an eye out for. So that'll be quite interesting, that apparently the front wing has got a big part to play. But then we start getting on to active aero. This is the change to the DRS. DRS is gone. But back on that in a minute. So here's the thing. We're now not going to have a situation where if you're 1 second behind the driver in front of you, you open the rear wing of your flap to make you faster down a particular straight. In fact, you are always adjusting the wings. And not just the rear wing, the front wing. There's going to be adjustments in both. They're going to be opening and closing based on what works for you. Now, could that be based on driving style? Could that be based on different things? And actually, because with each track being complex, the drivers are actually having to work out, right, is this where I need to open the wings or close the wings? Is this the smartest move? For example, let me give you a really good example, right? If we have a really long straight going into a hairpin, at what point do you close or open the flaps? It's almost going to be like a second brake and trying to work, whoever adjusts the wings last without going around. So it's almost like a bit of a driver skill element to this. This is not a switch on point and switch on off point, because it's always on. This is how drivers are going to work it out. This is going to be a bit more on the driver to be thinking about things, and I do like that side of things, because whereas the DRS, it was a set point you open the wing and a set point you close the wing, and you just opened the wing when you were 1 second behind the car. This is going to be a bit more about you choose when to switch it on, you choose when to switch it off, whether that works well for defending or attacking. Very fascinating to see how that's going to play out. Really fascinating. I do fear that we're going to get some crashes when drivers are overconfident, but part and parcel of what we're about to see. Now, this is where it comes to the DRS, and we're going to go old school when it comes to DRS and what is different. So previously, there were DRS zones. You might have up to 3. I don't think there was only 4 DRS zones on a single lap. 3 DRS zones or 2 or 1, however it was going to work out, where that would be a set point where you in a sense have that speed boost because of the aerodynamic changes. So what's different this time? Overtake mode. And what do I mean about this going old school? Because this was what they used to do back in the turbo eras, where drivers would have a button that would allow them to boost if they wanted to overtake somebody else. And again, we're talking strategy here. There's not an overtake part of the track. You choose when to overtake. Whether it's to surprise a driver or something like that with an overtake mode, you're going to have a set limit of energy. I think that's per lap, but we don't know. But the overtake button is now a strategy. This has turned into a bit more of a cerebral part of racing, and could be really interesting to see what happens here in terms of driver adaptability. Because let's be honest, ground effect was very much a physical part. It was a more physical. The porpoising that was going on, the weird way that the ground effect was, it felt like it was more of a, you had to be physically ready to do the racing. Whereas this feels more like a mental challenge. Every lap you're going to be thinking, qualifying, you're going to be thinking about everything. At what point do I put the overtake mode on? At what point do I open the flats? At what point do I close the flats? This is going to be a thinking man's game. And which of the drivers are going to cope with that the most? Now, if we're going to be talking about drivers just this year, the one driver I do worry about is Arvid Lindblad, because he's had no experience of F1, so probably can't think too far ahead. And actually, you might see that the drivers that have been here the longest, the ones that have got used to the know how regulations have worked and has seen the technical directives from the previous years, such as the technical directives on F ducts and things like that, different unusual things that mechanics did in the past, and the ones that have got experience of more of that, i.e. Lewis Hamilton, i.e. Nico Hulkenberg, i.e. Fernando Alonso, they might get a little bit of benefit out of this, because they might have been back in that era of thinking a bit more, basically the pre-DRS era. They were probably the only three drivers that were around pre-DRS. So really, really fascinating. So does overtake mode, this boost thing, does that remove the boost that we've been having over the past? No. They're going to have two boosts, and this really shows that, right? The boost and overtake are going to be two separate things. Overtake is that strategy DRS thing. Boost is their standard boost, so you can use boost to defend. So that will be really interesting. But what's also interesting, you see that recharge bit? So drivers are now more in control of the recharge, and going to select different modes and strategies and everything like that. So previously it was very much all about the brakes would recharge it and everything like that, but now drivers will basically control how much of that recharge is happening and different modes behind it. So we've already gone into a deep dive of the aerodynamics and the rule change throughout the lap, but I mentioned about the power element as well. And I know we've spoken about the overtake and the recharge, which is sort of the power element, but that is changing too. We're going electric. Well, not quite. It's now real 50-50, right? 50% petrol, 50% electric, approximately. So basically, as you can see, the engine output has been cut, the electric motor has tripled. Now, this is one of those ones where everything's going green, including me, but also it's a good thing. This is what provides the competitiveness. Because if car companies are trying to go green, then you want the racing to go green to ensure that they stay there or join. If it weren't for this, we wouldn't have Honda back in the sport, we wouldn't have Audi back in the sport. Red Bull wouldn't have their own engine supplier as well when it comes to Ford. And we wouldn't have Cadillac with General Motors. So big impact from all of that. So yes, it's going to be fascinating. Now, that's pretty much it. There are some extra things to talk about. There will be an improvement to safety, which I'm just showing you right now if you wanted to have a read of it. That there will be an improvement in terms of sustainable fuels. But that's like sort of everybody's using the same, so it doesn't really matter side of things. Where it comes into the design elements, that's where it's going to be. Now, will this work? Whenever they do these technical rule changes and everything like that, the whole idea of it is to make it more competitive, make it easier to overtake, make it more exciting for us as fans. Will it work? Well, the one close to guarantee is that if everyone designed the car the way that F1 has designed the original car, this one, probably yes. Because they will have worked it out, they will have had an idea behind it, and they will have known about it. This will be done by science and everything like that. But engineers want their cars to be the winner. And none of the cars will probably look like that. There might be one, but most of the time they will be adding complexities and tweaks that makes it more messy. So will it make it more messy this time? I don't know. I really don't know. This is one of those times where I don't think I've seen a direction like this before. For them to remove ground effects so soon, for them to make 3 dramatic changes in the same year, there's going to be a lot of catch up and a lot of working out. It's going to be messy. And I guess that's what makes it exciting. I genuinely don't know whether this will make it more competitive, but it certainly will have the opportunity to shake up the order. After all, every era change has had a shake up of the order. 2022 saw the rise again of Red Bull. 2014 was the rise of Mercedes. We're talking further back, 2009, when they had rule changes, the rise of Brawn, which turned out to be Mercedes, and the rise of Red Bull. Again, it's going to be Mercedes and Red Bull again, isn't it? No, I'm going to be hopeful. Right? Whenever there's rule changes, there will always be 1 or 2 teams that rise up above the others. Now, will it make it too messy and complicated for the others not to compete? I don't know. But this is what makes it fun. We're still, as I said at the start of the video, we are still in the days up to Christmas. We could be in 1 or 2 scenarios. We could be watching the Australian Grand Prix, the Japanese Grand Prix, Chinese Grand Prix, Bahrain Grand Prix, and everything ends up being like Monaco. No one ever overtakes. Or we could be in the opposite situation where we get our first ever overtakes at Monaco. Because things are smaller, because things are less complicated, and because now everyone's following. We don't know, basically, whether our Santa or our friends have given us a PC, an Xbox for Christmas, or a pair of socks. And that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it fascinating. That's what will keep us engaged. And I really hope we have a competitive season. But go back to that. This is a different way that F1 is going to operate. This is no longer about, when the only mental part of it that you were doing was, how late do I brake for corners? Where do I turn? And how do I recharge the battery? Now you're doing all those 3 things, and when do I adjust the aerodynamics? When do I put in the overtake? I will be interested as well. I haven't looked into it too much. At what point does the 1 second thing go into play? Is it as soon as you're 1 second behind the driver after lap 3, let's say? Or is it when you cross the line and that's when you get the overtake at the start of the lap? I'm guessing it's the latter. Be really interesting to see. But racing's going to be different. There's going to be a lot more thought into it. And this will see which drivers have got that capacity to think ahead. But basically, I'm saying that Lance Stroll won't get a single point. Anyways, that's all I've got to to really say on this. If you enjoyed my nerdy deep dive, then feel free to like and subscribe. If you've got any comments of the 2026 season, any predictions for the 2026 season, feel free to put them in the comments below. And all that's left to say is best of luck to everybody. We are days away from the first livery reveal. We are about a month away from pre-season testing and not that far away from the first round of the Grand Prix, first round of the season. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to be exciting. And we're going to be reviewing all the way. And I'm ND Ninja. So all I have to say is thanks everyone for your continued support, and take care.